Everyone deserves to be seen and respected. One act of kindness, one moment of courage to stand against what's wrong can change the world. The evening light spilled across the crosswalk when Evelyn Brooks stepped onto the street, holding her grocery bag close to her chest. A black BMW came out of nowhere, screeching inches from her knees. The driver slammed the horn and yelled instead of apologizing. For a second, Evelyn froze. The wind from the car brushed her coat, and her heart stuttered in disbelief. The man rolled down his window, shouting, "Watch where you're going, old lady." The crowd stared but said nothing. Evelyn stood still, trembling, her wrinkled hands tightening on the bag of apples now scattered across the asphalt. Her throat burned not from fear, but humiliation. After 72 years of surviving wars, losses, and widowhood, this was the cruelty that broke her. Then, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Pick them up, yourself." Everyone turned. A tall man in a charcoal suit had stepped out of a parked SUV, his eyes calm but cold as winter steel. Dominic Carver, a name whispered in boardrooms and back alleys alike. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command obedience. He walked toward the BMW, slow and deliberate. The driver's confidence faltered. "Sir, I didn't mean—" Dominic's gaze pinned him like an insect. "Apologize now." The man hesitated, but the tone in Dominic's voice carried no room for negotiation. He muttered, "I'm sorry, ma'am." Evelyn didn't reply. She simply nodded, eyes glistening with something between pain and pride. Dominic bent down, picking up the last apple that had rolled beneath the tire, and handed it back to her. "No one should talk to you like that." She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. His presence felt too vast, too heavy, like standing beside a storm that had chosen to protect her. He gave her a card, black, embossed, simple, Dominic Carver. No title, no company. "If anyone bothers you again, call this number." She nodded again, holding the card as if it was something fragile. He turned away, his coat catching the wind, disappearing into the evening traffic. That night, Evelyn placed the card on her nightstand beside her husband's photograph. She whispered, "He had your eyes, Harold, the kind that see right through people." Sleep came slowly, not from fear, but from the strange calm of being seen, truly seen for the first time in years. The next morning, something shifted in the air around her small neighborhood. People greeted Evelyn with sudden politeness. Even the shopkeeper who used to shortchange her now smiled nervously. She didn't understand why until she overheard two teenagers whisper, "That's the lady Carver helped last night." His name carried weight not from fame, but from the quiet kind of fear that bends arrogance into respect. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt safe walking down the street, not because she was powerful, but because someone powerful had decided she mattered. That afternoon, a bouquet of lilies arrived at her door. No note, just a card that said, "For dignity, not pity." She smiled faintly. The words felt like sunlight after years of cold rain. That evening, she took a walk by the river. The world looked the same, but her place in it had changed, or maybe she had simply remembered her own worth. Dominic Carver, meanwhile, sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city's bleeding lights. His assistant said softly, "The incident's cleaned up, sir." Dominic didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the woman's trembling hands, and the way she had looked at him, not with fear, but with something purer. "Do you think people forget what respect feels like?" he asked quietly. His assistant blinked. "Sir." "When power becomes the only language," Dominic continued, "kindness becomes a dialect. No one remembers how to speak." The room fell silent, filled only with the hum of city lights and his own unease. He poured a glass of whiskey, but the burn did nothing to quiet the echo of her voice. The silence she carried like grace. Evelyn spent her evening writing in her old notebook, something she hadn't done since her husband passed. She wrote, "Strength isn't volume, it's presence." Days passed. Then one afternoon, a black car stopped outside her home. The same man stepped out, less guarded this time, his eyes softer. "I owed you a proper visit," Dominic said. "Last time, I only stopped a fool. This time I wanted to meet the woman who stood her ground." Evelyn laughed gently. "I didn't stand. I was too stunned to move." "Still," Dominic replied, "you didn't bow." There was a pause, a quiet understanding between two people who had lived long enough to know what dignity costs. She invited him in for tea, and for the first time in decades, laughter filled her kitchen. Steam rose from the teacups, carrying the scent of chamomile and thyme. Dominic looked strangely out of place in her small kitchen, like a wolf sitting at a church pew. He noticed the old clock ticking unevenly, the floral curtains, the quiet hum of a simple life untouched by ambition. Evelyn smiled. "You look like someone who's never had tea without a contract attached." Dominic chuckled, surprising himself. "Maybe you're right. I've forgotten what it's like to just sit." They spoke for hours. About life, about loss, about the strange loneliness that comes when everyone fears you. Evelyn listened not as a subject to a king, but as a soul to another. "You built an empire," she said softly. "But what did it cost?" Dominic looked down. "Everything that couldn't be measured." Outside, rain began to fall, tapping the windows like distant applause for their honesty. He told her about his childhood, a boy who watched his mother work 3 jobs, who learned early that money makes people listen, and now she asked. "Now," he said quietly, I wonder if I built walls or prisons. Evelyn stirred her tea. Power isn't evil, Dominic, it's neutral. The question is whether you serve it, or it serves you. He stared at her, the words struck like truth, dressed in kindness. I've buried too many good intentions, he murmured. Maybe that's why I keep seeing ghosts in every reflection. Evelyn smiled gently. Then maybe it's time you stop fearing ghosts and start feeding the living. The simplicity of her wisdom disarmed him more than any rival ever had. That night, as he drove away, he passed the same intersection where he'd first seen her. The streetlight flickered the same color as memory. He parked there for a moment, watching strangers cross safely, and thought, how fragile respect really is, and how rare it feels when returned. When he reached his penthouse, he cancelled 3 meetings and called his accountant. Redirect the charitable fund, he said. I've found a better cause. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat by her window, looking at the rain, and whispered, maybe kindness still has a fighting chance. A week later, Evelyn received a letter hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a donation check big enough to rebuild the local community center. The signature read, D. Carver. She gasped. It wasn't just the money, it was the intention. A gesture of redemption wrapped in silence. When she called to thank him, he only said, don't thank me. Thank the part of me I thought had died. The center reopened, filled with laughter, food, and warmth. Dominic visited quietly at first, standing in the back like a man learning to breathe again. People recognized him, but no one dared approach. Only Evelyn waved and handed him an apron. Help or leave, she teased. He laughed genuinely this time and served soup to strangers who had no idea the city's most feared man was ladling kindness into their bowls. But goodness has a way of drawing darkness out of hiding. That evening, as Dominic left, a black car waited across the street. 2 men inside watched him closely, their expressions cold, calculating. By midnight, a message reached him. You're forgetting who you are. Don't make us remind you. Dominic stared at the note. His hand trembled for the first time in years. He whispered, maybe that's the point. The next day, Evelyn found him sitting on a bench near the river, his eyes distant. They're not happy you're changing, she guessed softly. They built me, he said. Every cruel decision, every broken life, all of it was the currency of loyalty. Evelyn looked at him, unflinching, then used the same loyalty to build something worth keeping. Dominic turned to her, his voice barely audible. They'll come for me, and maybe for you. She smiled. Let them come. I've lived through worse storms. You can't scare someone who's already made peace with her past. For a long moment, silence hung between them, heavy, tender, unbreakable. Dominic exhaled slowly. You know, Evelyn, I've spent my whole life trying to control fear. But you teach it how to listen, she chuckled. And you're learning that even the strongest walls can grow flowers if you let them. That night, Dominic sat at his desk, penning letters to people he had wronged, investors, employees, even enemies. No apologies, just truths. He sealed each envelope with a quiet conviction. Redemption isn't about erasing what you did. It's about what you do next. The storm came faster than either of them expected. Anonymous threats turned into surveillance, silence into footsteps. Dominic knew the pattern. He had designed it himself years ago. By the 3rd night, one of his warehouses was burned, a warning. The city's underbelly was reminding him who still ruled its shadows. He didn't flinch. Instead, he walked straight into their world, a dimly lit club filled with people who once bowed to him. At the far end sat Victor Hale, his former lieutenant, now wearing arrogance like armor. You've gone soft, Dominic, he sneered, serving soup with the saints now. Dominic didn't rise to the bait. No, he said calmly. I'm just cleaning the mess I helped make. Victor laughed. You think one old woman's smile can wash away blood? Dominic leaned forward. Maybe not, but it's a start. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? The room shifted. Men who once obeyed Victor now looked uneasy, cracks forming where fear used to live. Victor's face hardened. You walk away from us, you die. Dominic's voice dropped to a whisper. Then so be it. But I'd rather die standing in the light than live kneeling in the dark. He turned and left. No one stopped him. Power, he realized, had always been an illusion sustained by silence. When Evelyn heard what happened, she didn't panic. She simply brewed tea and waited. She knew he'd come, and he did. Hours later, rain-soaked and exhausted, he sat by her fire, staring into the flames. I used to believe control was safety, he said. Now I see it was just fear in a suit. Evelyn nodded. Freedom doesn't mean having no enemies, Dominic. It means they no longer own your soul. He smiled faintly. You make it sound so easy. It isn't, she replied. That's why most people never try. Outside, the storm hammered the windows, but inside, there was peace, the kind born not from certainty, but surrender. The next morning, Dominic stood at the community center again, serving food, unguarded, unarmed. Word had spread, even his rivals had heard. Some came to watch, expecting weakness. Instead, they found strength wrapped in humility. One whispered, he's untouchable now. Another corrected, no, he's free. Evelyn watched from across the room, tears glimmering. She had seen many kinds of courage, but never one so quiet. Dominic looked up, met her eyes, and nodded. A promise passed between them, not of safety, but of purpose. Years passed quietly. The city changed, as cities do. New towers rose where old scars once stood. But in a small corner of that same city, the community center still opened its doors every morning. Evelyn grew frail, her laughter softer, her steps slower. Yet, when she spoke, the whole room listened, because wisdom, unlike youth, grows louder with time. One evening, as the sun spilled gold across the floor, Dominic found her sitting by the window, a blanket over her knees. She smiled when she saw him. "You built something real here," she whispered, "not with money, but with meaning." He took her hand, trembling. "You showed me how. Before you, I only knew how to control, not how to care." Evelyn closed her eyes, breathing slowly. "Dominic, control is just fear pretending to be strength. Let go and you'll finally be strong enough to love." Those were her last words. She passed that night peaceful, unafraid. The next morning, Dominic opened the center alone. He didn't announce her death. He just worked, quietly, the way she had lived. Weeks later, the city held a small memorial. People spoke not of power or success, but of kindness, the rarest currency in a world obsessed with gain. When the ceremony ended, Dominic walked to the rooftop. The skyline glimmered under dusk's purple haze. He whispered, "Evelyn, you were right. Power builds walls. Love builds bridges." He looked down at the streets once ruled by fear, now filled with laughter, music, and life. He finally understood. Redemption is not about erasing the past, but illuminating it so others can walk safely through their own darkness. Years later, his hair silvered, Dominic still came to that center. He greeted strangers, shared food, and listened more than he spoke. One young volunteer once asked, "Mr. Carver, how did you change so much?" He smiled. "Because one day I realized, the world doesn't remember what you owned, only what you gave." The boy nodded quietly, absorbing the weight of that truth. As Dominic left that evening, the same storm that once raged over his life now sounded distant, gentle, almost forgiving. He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, thought he saw Evelyn's reflection in the clouds, smiling, proud. Then he whispered the truth he had waited a lifetime to learn. Peace doesn't come when the storm ends. It comes when you stop fearing the rain. And with that, Dominic Carver walked home not as the man who once ruled the city, but as the man who finally ruled himself.